Accountancy Committee meeting, 22nd of November. Start with apologies for absence. I think everybody is here. Any declarations of interest?
The usual standard chartered bank interest. Thank you.
Moving on to A3, minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of September. Any comments on those minutes, or are you happy for me to sign them off?
Liz? Sorry, if I can find it now. On A3, it says that Taryn endeavoured to provide clarification. I think Taryn does better than endeavour. I mean, you know, it was sent out subsequently. And then also, I think on the true and fair, on the Grenfell work, I don't think we can really have true and fair. I mean, that really has something, a meaning in law in the Companies Act, and there are legal opinions on it. Martin Law, Bompus. We just say external, independent verification or something like that.
Yeah. Those are the minutes to be signed, yeah. Okay, so amending, we're going to make amendments to those. Have we got that noted?
Yes.
You got it? Brilliant. David, is that a hand up? No? Great, so minutes approved subject to those changes. A4, action tracker. Who is going to be, is Davy Hughes not coming tonight? Moira is standing in.
I can cover some of them, Chair.
Well, I think, take it as read.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say on this action tracker is it's looking very good and complete, but we're not, it's quite difficult to see which ones have been done and which ones haven't.
I can point out that the first one, we said we'd give you a verbal update. There was some discussion at the last meeting about legal advice and exit payments.
Yes, so is David not coming here to discuss
Sorry, no, he's unwell.
He's unwell, oh dear, yeah. Okay.
So I'm standing in for David.
Okay, hold on, let's just reverse up. In future, can we sort of grey out the things that have been done and actioned?
Yeah.
First point. Then let's go to committee members to see if there are any points in there in the action tracker that they would like to look at, and then we'll go tomorrow on that specific point which I have engaged with David on before. Yes, Councillor Deckard.
Thank you. Just briefly, but this, I think this has already been noted in the previous meeting about the number and seniority of Grenfell-related staff. I think we've already made a note of that before, because we haven't had that, and we did ask that before, so that is coming, isn't it, presumably?
Which ones, whereabouts is that?
Sorry, the breakdown of the number and seniority of Grenfell-related staff. And that was asked again in the earlier session. So we're waiting for that information, aren't we?
Second point, as well as the greying, can we number these? Yeah. Taryn, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, just to say that action's with me, so apologies to the committee. I'll follow that one up. That one's with me.
Okay, and then over to Liz.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly. In the minutes, it said that the scope of the value for money work had changed, and more on this would be presented at a future meeting, and I didn't see that in the log of actions. Sorry, could you hear me?
Scope for the value for money.
Scope of value money had changed, and more would be brought back to a future meeting. I didn't see that in the action log.
Yep. Could put that on, or do you want to comment on it?
We'll add that to the tracker. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Moira, do you want to talk about?
So there's a few that I can tell you I definitely have updated. The first one, which I mentioned, was the verbal update. You asked for some extra information about the legal advice provided prior to some exit packages. David has discussed this with the Director of HR, and I think he's explained to you that sometimes these events are at the moment, so they have to get advice quite quickly, and it can be verbal, but that will be now annotated so that there is a record kept of what's happened and why that decision was made.
So this is, just so everyone knows, regarding our comments in the last meeting about the Deputy Director, their exit package, of which David Hughes had emailed me that to that effect, and has promised a fuller report, written report, in the next meeting. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. This related to the question that I raised in the last meeting about this specific topic, and the specific point on this one being that this needs to be annotated, not just on a going forward basis, but this needs to be annotated.
All of the packages are going to be reviewed and records show to support all of those payments and what decisions were made for them. We've had to do some work with our provider to get the additional information required for that, but they will be recorded.
So I think there's two things. One
Yes.
is we're going to do this going forward,
Yes.
but secondly, I don't think this committee is happy with a verbal answer on what has, on the previous Deputy Director's exit package, and hence we're going to need that in the report.
Okay.
May I just say that if advice was given verbally, there should be no problem requesting that same person to put it in writing. I don't understand why this is a difficult thing.
I agree.
It just wasn't at the time, apologies.
It wasn't at the time, but
it will be annotated as to why that decision was made, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on the action tracker? Nope. So moving on to the mid-year Treasury monitoring. Would like to kick off?
Evening, everybody. It's lovely to be back in person again. I'll just, I'm conscious that you've got a longer agenda than ever tonight, so hopefully I can be quickly gotten rid of. If I could start the committee by looking at point 2.3. I don't usually comment on the economic background, but where it says that the Bank of England was expecting inflation to exceed 4% by the end of the calendar year. They were right, but they were right. In October, we actually breached 4%, and the inflation figure actually came in at 4.2. Expectations is that it will fall back in line, but that's due to largely driven by energy costs that we're all obviously aware of. 2.4 as well, the GDP figures year on year have been reduced from circa 3% to around 2%, and that's reflecting the supply chain problems. Again, we've all got friends that run businesses, and they've undoubtedly all got supply constraints, so that's where that comes from. If you're not making things, you can't sell them. I won't go into the financial market details, other than to say that at 2.9, where it gives a 20-year Public Works Loan Board price, what we saw at the end of October was downward pressure on gilts, which fed through to PWLB pricing. So you can actually get a 20-year deal at around 1.9% now, a 50-year deal between 1.6, 1.7%. But as I've said at this committee before, whilst that's cheap long-term borrowing, we really, really have to be mindful when we borrow that we actually need that cash and that it doesn't sit there, because the cost of carry would be pretty much all of that loan value versus the contra. The only contra would be what we can get back internally in the money markets. Your consultant's given a bank rate forecast. This forecast is actually a month out of date now. What I would imagine is going to happen would be a rate rise in December to 0.25 and possibly a rate rise in the spring. The market was pricing in for November, which didn't happen. We are seeing similar prices, but nothing like the market anticipation from last month. If I could ask you to turn to point 3.1 and the table. The Public Works Loan Board portfolio, we've had one maturity in the first half of the year, so that's reduced your principal outstanding, and it's also reduced your average weighted portfolio rate, because as deals mature, they're typically the oldest deals which were at higher interest rates, so it just means you're paying a lower rate of interest. On the investment side, what stands out immediately is we've taken a chunk of cash into money market funds and out of fixed term deposits, and that's not accidentally, that's deliberately. You're about to go into the short-term bond fund that I've alluded to at this committee before. Actually, the trade was done today and the cash will be going this week. Also, given that we're doing that, we really want a lot of liquidity there. Whilst there was opportunity to pick a few basis points up when the market pricing was favourable last month, we decided not to, because this short-term bond fund, you'll get the pickup here. We really don't want to put longer-term deals together, which then means we've got liquidity issues and we have to then go to the market and borrow. That's completely counterproductive. I'd say your cash is typically grown about 20, 30 million so far this quarter, so we're at about 190 million today. At 3.2, just gives an indication of your half-yearly position. So, I mean, the weighted average rates, they're not great, but we are where we are. The oversupply of cash is still very much there, and actually, even if interest rates were to rise, it would take money market funds a considerable amount of time to replace their paper and to get performance. But actually, we have the upside of that, because when COVID started and the base rate was reduced from 0.75 to 0.1%, we actually got some cushioning in. So it's just the negative side of the positive that we received last year. At 4.3, all I'm trying to show here is that whilst rates are low, they're still beating LIBID, and they can beat LIBID because money market funds have stayed in positive territory. They can do longer deals, they can deal with names we can't. Obviously, the funds themselves are highly liquid, and we're still getting a little bit of outperformance from the legacy deals that we've got held for you. That was the main things I was going to cover. I mean, I do always finish by saying that we are fully compliant with the prudential indicators. There's been a consultation out recently about a new prudential code and a new Treasury management code, which we've responded to. If any of the committee want to see that, I can make it available very easily. And if the committee want to see the deals themselves, Appendix B is where your cash was placed at the 30th of September.
Thank you very much. You do have a very hard job. Predicting the future over the last couple of years has been particularly difficult. But the one thing that hasn't happened is interest rates haven't gone up, and making your ability to make us a return harder and harder. So thank you for trying.
It's very difficult, and I think that selecting a good short-term bond fund, it's not the sort of vehicle that's going to shoot the lights out, but actually 1% isn't unreasonable in a short-term bond fund, so you should get some pickup. It's taken some time. The due diligence with asset managers these days is a considerable process. There was a little bit of legal work that we had to do as well around investing, and we didn't quite like the initial terms we were offered. So, yeah, whereas it's taken sort of 2-3 months to get you invested, but hopefully that's a good long-term decision, and it's a diversifier away from cash for exactly that reason. I don't believe in chasing basis points, particularly for your council.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me is 2 or 3 years ago, we had a lot of money lent out to other councils, which generally we get the better interest rates on, and that's come down dramatically over the last few years. I know we have discussed it before. Are you considering putting some more out into other councils?
There's still a market. There is still a local authority market. We'll see. We'll get the bond fund fully seeded. If there's no, so we'll get the bond fund seeded. I'll look at what rates do in December. If we do, it will likely be 3- and 6-month deals that we start with.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Williams.
Yes, as you said, the policy of this council has always been not to chase small amounts of yield for greatly increased risk. I must confess I don't know a great deal about these money market funds. What are the risks if, as you say, as I would say, that the risk in local authorities is really zero, because, as you say elsewhere in the paper, they're never allowed to go bust. Probably the risks on major banks is pretty well near zero. But what about these funds? I mean, they seem very opaque to me. I am worried.
The beauty of money market funds is they are stable net asset value. So you pay £1, it's worth £1, no matter what happens to the fund. So the money is actually ring-fenced from the asset manager. So if something happens to the asset manager, the money market fund still makes its deal. It's AAA rated, and to my knowledge, a money market fund has never defaulted. Back in pre-financial crisis times, they weren't very popular at all. You could do a lot better lending to quality banks, building societies. Money market funds came into their own when rating agencies started rating all the building societies, banks were downgraded, people got a bit uppity about their cash. So here was a solution where it's daily priced. If you want to clear your money market funds today and put every penny back in tomorrow, you can without penalty. So it's just convenience. As to the underlying securities themselves, again, you used to have very good money market funds and poor ones, and you'd have a buy list of the best funds. Actually, nowadays, with 1, 2, 3 basis points, they're much of a muchness. But in terms of specifically addressing risk, no money market fund has defaulted.
There's always a first time. I'm worried about some out there, as I say, I don't understand how they work, really. Is there a potential counterparty risk?
There's always a risk of default within the fund, yes. There's a risk that a counterparty won't honour its obligation, yes. Okay. But that doesn't fall out in the net asset price.
I rest my case.
Any further questions? What can we do to allay Councillor Williams's fears, which has now probably spread through the committee, in terms of the money market funds? Would you be able to get us a paper or?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can do a training session. You've got Arlene Close on board now. We pay them good money to train us. So let's go for that.
Or a note on how you did the due diligence. Councillor Williams, help me out here.
Yes, well, as I said, I'd like a greater understanding of how they work and in particular the remote possibility, I admit it is remote, of counterparty risk in stress times. Because I say, I mean, if it was, we seem to be getting very, very small amounts of additional interest, but I can't really see,
If it's
understand the risk, that's the point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So perhaps you could get us a paper together in layman's terms. Try not to make it too complex, but...
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Curtis.
Yeah, the risk is only the same as the underlying investments, and the risk shouldn't be any higher than it is for our other counterparties, but we can do a paper to show that. So it's the same, I mean, as Matt said, there's a risk with every investment. There is even a risk with other local authorities. There are local authorities that we won't name that we might not want to invest with. A local authority has never defaulted, but
Yet.
these are different times. Sorry?
But one or two local authorities aren't quite the same shape
No,
that they were a couple of years ago.
no. I think
Northamptonshire.
there are authorities that have almost gone bankrupt in the sense that they've issued Section 114 orders, so reports. So although you would say there was no risk, you can't really say none at all. And I think the same applies to money market funds. There's the tiniest amount of risk is perhaps how it would be described. But we can compare the risk between these different instruments in a paper, I think.
I think that would be useful and appreciated. Thank you very much. A6, external audit contract. This is for decision. Mike, would you like to talk us through this? I mean, take it as read, so
Yeah.
probably go to your recommendation.
Yeah, so obviously auditors used to be appointed by the Audit Commission, but we've been able to appoint our own and do so every 5 years. And the current contract that we have with Grant Thornton through the PSAA ends on the 31st of March 2023. So we do now need to appoint a new auditor, either through the PSAA or by some other arrangement. Most councils use the PSAA. It says so in the report. I think it's 98% of councils, all in London apart from the City of London, who have a wider range of audit than any other local authority, because obviously they are a local authority plus in some ways. So we're proposing in this report that we use the PSAA again. We think we got a good result last time, having Grant Thornton, who are ahead of the other auditors in the market in terms of getting their audits completed, and hopefully that will continue. It is a small pond that we're fishing in for auditors that can do local authority accounts, a small pond. So we think the PSAA is the best mechanism to do that with. We don't really have the capacity or the skills within the council or the expertise to appoint our own auditor. So what we're asking is that you recommend onto council, we have to make the decision that we use the PSAA to appoint our next external auditors.
Thank you. Liz.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much for the paper. I mean, I suppose in principle I've no concern about using the PSAA, but I do have two queries that, I mean, first, I was somewhat concerned in 2.2 that contracts were awarded with 50% of the score awarded to price and 50% to quality, because I think audit quality should be key. And, you know, very often audit committees tender the audits and they'll do it fee blind to make sure they appoint the auditor who will give them the highest quality audit. And I also question, if you could clarify for me, please, If we opt into this, if we have an issue with our auditor, say we don't think they're objective or independent or become too cosy with management, they're not giving us an independent view, can we do anything, or are we tied in for this time?
Well, I think we are tied in for the period, taking that one first, I think we are tied in for the period of the contract. If we have issues with the auditors, we obviously can take that up with the firm, and we can take that up with the PSAA as well. If we were really dissatisfied and not been in that situation, but I think if we had good grounds, we could ask for them to be changed, but the situation hasn't really arisen for us. A lot of councils currently are dissatisfied with their audits purely because they're not getting done. That's the current position in a lot of places across London. That a lot are very far behind, and it's been recognised that that's partly because the price being paid has fallen too much. The Redmond review into local authority audits actually found that the price has fallen quite a lot, and the firms are struggling to do the work as a result. I mean, you could say they shouldn't have bid at that price, but they did, and that's led to these problems. I think again, it's quite a small pool. There aren't many companies in it, so it is difficult. If we get into that situation, there aren't a lot of firms out there who can do it. But I hope we won't get into that situation, and we'll work to not get into that situation. And with regards to price and quality, I think, I suppose the response to that, in a sense, is that, again, only firms that have got the quality to manage the audit within this sector will be appointed. So that means that the quality, in a sense, is there, should be there. But I don't know how else you could do it, really. But say not include price at all. I think there'd be some concerns about that as well. So this kind of has to be a decision on that.
Chairman, I've got the floor. Thank you. So I clearly see the paper leads to the recommendation we go with the national contract. But my eye was taken to 2.4, where we awarded the contract. We had Grant Thornton first year 113,000 a year. It's grown to 173,000. There is a legend explaining it. It's COVID, but I think there's some other factors. I think my point is that joining in with a sort of large national contract seems a good idea if you do get price or low price and it's sustainable low price. That hasn't happened. So I kind of think that there's a flaw in being part of this national contract if we're interested in lowest price, because yes, they came up with lowest price, but it wasn't sustainable for the reasons Mike has stated. On the quality side, I'm with my colleague here that I place a higher weight on quality than price, and I think that our input to get the highest quality auditor is diluted by being part of this contract. The second point is my eye is taken with the City of London. I think it's Ernst & Young that do the work. Of course, they start off at 128. It's actually gone down. So it is possible. I know their circumstances it's a different beast, but my natural inclination would be, because of the lowest price hasn't been sustained, wanting to take back some direct control of appointing auditors. However, this isn't the biggest issue, I think, that's facing the council, and if there's a limited amount of resource available to this task, I will accept that we go to into the national contract again. But I'd like to sort of look again at it next time round with a view that it isn't the default that we're part of a national contract. We do think quite proactively about whether we'd like to take more direct control of it.
Presumably the next time round is in 5 years' time.
Yeah. So it's quite long term, but we can, I'm identifying, I think, some flaws.
Yeah.
But I'm respectful that there are a lot of other things sort of on our plates,
Yeah.
and that this isn't the biggest issue.
I appreciate what you're saying. I do think that the fee in 2018-19 was too low, and so the increase in price, although it might not seem good, I know it's £60,000. We'd rather not pay it, but I think actually it's got us a better outcome. I think we were the first council to be audited. Our audit was completed first in London, and that's partly because we did accept the fee increases and accept that they needed to charge more. So they haven't. I don't think we had a lot of choice. I sort of agree that, but if we'd taken the other choice and said no, you must do it for the lowest possible price, I think we'd have been in the same position that a lot of other councils are in, where their audits just have not been completed. So I just do acknowledge their point that the fees have been driven down enormously. I mean, they went to about 40% of what they were in the Audit Commission days, and I think that they probably just were driven too far down.
The other thing I reflected on was if you go independent, you've got to find an auditor.
Oh yes, yeah,
And
you have to run a tender plan, and you have to be confident
going back
that you
to
run it, but
the papers we looked at in the previous meeting, we've paid 5 or 6 million quid to other firms. Actually, it's not. It's in this paper further on. In terms of looking, we've paid 5 or 6 million pounds to a combination of Ernst & Young and PwC, etc., for non-audit work. And generally, then they're quite reluctant to do the audit because that prevents them from doing non-audit work. I just wonder whether you go independent and actually you struggle to find anyone, given the high-profile nature of this borough.
yeah, there are definitely pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
But if you ask me which way I would like to go, it would be independent, strike the best deal, choose the professional advisor who'd work for our council without any of the constraints of a national programme around it. I understand why we might go with somebody else doing it, but I think I'm probably just registering the point that my vote goes, go with it this time round, but don't think that that's the default forever.
Okay.
Let's have a look at it and be open-minded, because I do think there are positives about being more independent, and this is it's just a very large scale, and I'm cynical, sceptical of large-scale government-led projects.
Okay. Cazette, do you have a point?
Thank you, Chair. So I support the recommendation, and I note that you already have an action to understand what precisely the steps would be if there is some kind of situation arising with the auditor in the future where we're dissatisfied. So we should definitely, as part of the board's recommendation and consideration, know that as part of the recommendation that we make. But my question is the following. What is the difference between the scale fee and the actual fee? Can you explain what the scale fee is, please? And then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, so the scale fee is the indicative fee that is kind of set at the beginning of the year based on what we think the cost will be. Obviously, actual fee does vary once the audit starts, and that's the final fee that we've paid. Just in kind of previous years, so back in 2018-19, just to explain some of the differences, there was additional work. So we'd recently changed over our financial systems, and so obviously the external audit work was more involved than what they'd anticipated when they set the budget at the start. So that was one of the reasons. 1920, it came about, there was additional work required on our fixed assets, which obviously required more audit time and therefore an increased fee. I know for 2021 we picked up on kind of COVID, but we've also got, which I think we'll come on to in the next paper, obviously new value for money arrangements, which is reflective. So the auditors try their best endeavours at the beginning to kind of indicate what the fee will be, but we never quite know until the audit is finished. What I would say is that they always discuss the increase in the audit fee with us before, prior to...
Well, they're required to do that.
Yeah.
But that's, so my observation is, I hear you on the reasons for the variability in the final actual fees that are reflected in the table. But what I don't understand is if you have a discussion about what the scale fee is at the start of each year, how is it possible that by the time you get to 2021, it's still at 93? How is it possible that for 21-22, it's only 100, given that last year was 173? It seems that these conversations are really not well thought through on Grant Thornton's part if there's such a disparity between the scale fees that are proposed at the start and what they actually turn out to be. And furthermore, one last point, when we go through this PSAA option again, are those scale fees set by that consortium, or are they actually set by the auditor that's appointed at the time? So 2 follow-up questions. Thank you, Chair.
On the second question, if I can take that away, I believe it's set by the PSSA in that agreement, but let me just, I don't want to confirm that just in case. And absolutely, I think, you know, your comment about actually the scale fee has remained fairly static over the last 4 years, and we would have expected. I mean, it is a slightly different reason for the increase in the final fee each year. It's not always the same reason, but I think that's a really good point, and it's something that we can take when we're having that conversation with the auditors prior to the audit starting. Because
it seems to me that this is a cumulative impact, not a one-off for different reasons each year, which would indicate to me that the scale fee for 2021-22 is way too low, given that it was 173 last year. This just doesn't add up for me, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Well, I hope it'll be less this might be a hostage to fortune, so I hope it'll be less for 21-22, but because there was an impact of COVID, and I mean, I won't look for it now, but we did have exchanges about the fees. We don't, we do discuss it with them. It is true that we don't have a great deal of choice because there are reasons that they can justify the increase in fees by, and they do that, and they get permission to do that. So COVID was an example, the new financial system, the fact that everywhere has struggled to get the audit done this year.
I hear you on all of those reasons, but it doesn't add up that the scale fee then goes way back down to what it was before the following year.
Oh.
So I hear you.
Well, I think that's the fee that was set at the very beginning, isn't it? That's the.
But it can't, yes, but it can't be because it goes from 93 and then 100. So something's not right here. And what would the scale fees then be for a new arrangement? I think I've made the point.
Yeah, okay. And given the experience without, what's the point in having the scale fees if they don't come out of them? Yeah.
Well, they do have to justify the increase.
Yeah, well, there are always ways to justify things.
They can't just charge anything.
Yeah.
It may look like that.
We did have this discussion in... We have had this discussion in July, I think. Yeah. Look, I would be more concerned about the fees if we were still waiting for our accounts to be finalised. You know, it's much easier to agree to a fee increase when they've done a good job, and they seemingly have. Anyway, we've got to come to a decision. David, you happy to go with the recommendation? Great. So we're happy to go with the recommendation, subject to. Yeah. In particular, what happens if we want to get rid of them? Great. Thank you very much. Right, A7, value for money. Who's going to do this? Are you going to do this, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, take it as read. what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so we had to pay for this as well, actually, which I found somewhat upsetting, and did debate the cost. But so obviously KPMG were our previous auditors prior to Grant Thornton, and they were the auditors at the time of the Grenfell tragedy. They decided at that time they couldn't give a VFM opinion for 2016-17 or for 17-18 because of the tragedy until the inquiry and indeed the police inquiry was completed. That's, I think, taken much longer than was expected, but because of the things that have come out in the inquiry and because of our opening statement, the statements that we've made to the inquiry, RBKC have made to the inquiry, they now feel that there's sufficient evidence for them to give an opinion, and obviously it is an adverse opinion on the value for money during these 2 years, and this adverse opinion is purely because of the council's management of the TMO, so the clienting of the TMO contract. And as I say, that's based really on our own evidence. They haven't come in and interviewed people. They've looked at the evidence that we've presented to the inquiry, where I think we have said there was deficiencies. And I think given that they feel they're able to give an opinion now, it's important that they do so, and we allow them to do so, because it will enable Grant Thornton to then give an opinion for the 2 years that follow this, so 2018-19 and 2019-20, where Grant Thornton did do some value for money work, but they're unable to give an opinion until the preceding opinion had been given. So that will now be possible. They'll be able to give an opinion on whether the changes that we talked about in the previous meeting, the changes to the way the council is managed and the culture of the council, whether they, and particularly the value for money arrangements of the council, obviously the arrangements for getting best value for money at a sort of strategic level, whether those mean that we are now in a better position on VFM. And, you know, I'm not prejudging what that opinion will be, but it's something they can now do. It said, I think it said in the tracker about there are some changes to the way they're going to look at VFM for 2021. We probably don't want to go too much into that now, but there is actually no opinion for that year, last year, but they present the weaknesses of the council with regards to value for money, or all councils, and that work is also underway. So all of those opinions and lists of weaknesses will be able to be published now that I don't think we have any choice but to agree this. It is just, it is the opinion of KPMG and the one they're giving us, and this enables it to go forward with regard to the future years.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, just one from me, Mike, through the chair. What is the implication of a qualified report? Implication of a qualified report in this?
It's not a qualification. It's just an adverse opinion. It doesn't mean it's a qualification on the accounts. There isn't really an implication. It will just be published, and that's the opinion that will be given, and the accounts will be fully closed for those 2 years when the objection is also dealt with. So I don't think there's really any implication beyond it's just there on the public record.
Does it have any impact on the Grenfell inquiry?
No, I don't think it will have an impact, because in a sense they're behind the inquiry, aren't they? So I don't think there'll be an impact, and I don't think. I mean, there isn't really any new information in this. Everything that's in the letter is stuff that information that's gone to the inquiry, mainly in our own opening statement to the inquiry. So they're obviously evaluating it. We don't disagree with the opinion they're given. So I think it just puts it on the public record, really, in the audit sphere as well as the other spheres that it's there for.
Okay, thank you for that. And Grant Thornton are happy with this? They're happy with this, and they're working on their value for money opinions?
Yeah, they're now working on they've started work on that. They can't actually do anything officially until the objection is dealt with, and the objection is being dealt with at the same time as well.
Okay.
So, and then KPMG will be out of the loop with regards to the audit, and they're not actually involved in this market anymore, I don't think. So they're so I think that's another reason they want to close it off, really.
Okay.
Chair?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Waving around. Yeah, so I just want to understand this because people are going to ask me. So the criticism or the comment or the qualified, I don't know, analysis or whatever we want to call it, is only relating to the clienting of the TMO contract?
Well, they're saying that the council didn't achieve VFM, value for money, overall, and the reason it didn't is because of the failure to properly manage the properly client the tenant management organisation. So we did fail. The council did fail overall in achieving value for money, but it was for that specific reason. So they didn't identify any problems with the medium-term financial strategy or any other aspects that they looked at.
Okay, so they're quite happy with the council spending priorities and so on in those years leading up to the fire. They don't look at that, or they thought they were perfectly fair and reasonable.
Well, they're not really commenting on our spending priorities. They're commenting on the arrangements that we make to make sure that we make the right decisions and that we deploy our resources well. And with regards to clienting that contract, for the reasons they've outlined in the report, they don't feel that we did. So, and I think essentially they're saying that there wasn't enough attention paid to that contract.
Okay, now I'm saying, can I just pursue this a bit, Chair, because I'm just trying to get my head around, because people will be asking me and I want to understand it. So, value for money, I can think of a dozen things which I personally wouldn't think value for money, but clearly our auditors may think are value for money. But, in an extreme example, and this happened quite some years ago, but if this has happened at the same time, for example, that we were spending on Holland Park School, which was very expensive, would they think, oh, that was perfectly good value for money? I mean, I don't know how they quantify what is value for money, if you see what I mean.
Well, it's just that they don't really look at individual items of expenditure and say whether value for money was achieved in them. They're looking at the arrangements we have in place to ensure that we do get value for money. So they're looking at things like the way we manage contracts.
But but that's exactly. I mean, so just giving that example, which I say was some years before, but if it happened at the same time, for example, Holland Park School, the way that was, because we looked into that in the procurement scrutiny that we did, that actually that was managed very poorly because we didn't have proper, proper oversight of what was happening there. So I'm just trying to understand how they judge what is and isn't value for money. Holland Park School being definitely, and it came out in the procurement report that it wasn't good value for money. So
right, yeah.
Is that something they'd pick up on, or are they just looking at our mechanisms rather than actually projects?
Well, they're looking at the mechanisms, and they could look at specific examples of how the mechanisms are working. I don't think if there was, one, it has to be material, so it has to be a large breach, really, and clearly the TMO contract was. So they're not, by giving a positive value for money contract, I don't think they'd say that they were saying that we achieve value for money absolutely everywhere in all cases. I mean, they are looking at quite a strategic and overall level. But given that they said that we didn't achieve it, in a sense, it almost doesn't matter if we didn't achieve it in other places, because they've said that the council in 2016-17 and 2017-18 did not achieve value for money because we didn't have proper arrangements in place.
Okay.
And
that's just in relation to TMO? It's
well,
just in relation
that's the
to...
evidence
Okay.
for the fact that we didn't achieve it. I mean, there could be other examples, and the only other area they've talked about is in terms of medium-term financial strategy, in which case they say that the arrangements were satisfactory. So it is going to be at quite a high level, because they won't have enough audit time to go into every contract we managed and things like that. So they're looking at the overall arrangements we have in place, and they will look at that again, and Grant Thornton will look at that for the following years.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Cosette?
Thank you, Chair. So I note in the letter, which is quite well laid out, that they talk about the basis on which they evaluated value for money on pages 3 and 4, and what their overall conclusion was. So I have just one comment and then a question. The comment is with regard to their finding on page 4 that we didn't achieve value for money in those years. And just to say that in reflecting upon that in the session we just had, it's understandable why that might have been the case in that moment, given that the priority was perhaps not on efficiency at that time, but on helping people. So it is an understandable thing. And to build on the comment that was made earlier about would it impact the inquiry, I think optically it could, not because that there's a tangible issue with our accounts in the borough, but because the optics of we were not necessarily focused on all of those dimensions of efficiency, economy, effectiveness in that moment. And that is a possibility that it could come up. My question is, there are a number of findings here about things that we didn't do at the time. And so my question is, have we traced these through to today? Have we remedied them all? Are there lessons to be learned? That's my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, and most of the findings are found because we as a council have said to the inquiry that we acknowledge that these failings were in place. So they're not finding things that we don't acknowledge. We have acknowledged all of these, and we would say that they have been remedied, and I think the report itself outlines at least some of the ways in which they've been remedied. I mean, not least, of course, by bringing the TMO back in-house and managing it directly, and changing the management of the council, and changing the values of the council, political changes that have taken place, and so forth. It isn't, I think the question really, the more important question is whether that's been successful, and that's to some extent what Grant Thornton will give an answer on. But of course it's something that there will be different opinions on, as we've seen in the earlier committee.
When are we expecting to hear from Grant Thornton on the value? Have they set a sort of time frame as to?
Haven't got a time frame yet, but hopefully that will be within the next 6 months or so.
Okay.
Okay.
Will they come and talk to us about that first before they issue their opinion?
Well, they'll definitely talk. They'll definitely talk to us, to officers.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
So are they coming to our March meeting?
but
So
then they will. I think they will bring
Yes. So we'll be able to discuss
and we can
it
make
with
sure
them
that they
then.
do bring it here to say what they're going to do and what they're going to
Okay.
say.
Great. Thank you. Right, A8. This is for decision, and we've been given 3 options David Hughes is not here, so Taryn is going to be on the mic, are you? Great. What does everyone think? It's tricky. Okay, we'll start from left to right. Emma?
That's the wrong button, sorry, Chair. I think we have to go for external audit, whichever firm we use. I just think, given the, and I should have said earlier when the questions, however forcefully people put it, a lot of people are really, really concerned about this. I do live in the area, and people ask me all the time, "Where's the money gone? Where's the money gone?" And I do think we must do this, not, whether or not we trust the figures as they are themselves. I think reputationally we must.
When you say external auditor, is that including or not including Grant Thornton?
I'm really not somebody to judge. No, I think I don't mind if it's external or Grant Thornton.
But to do a full report or to do a further review? Like Grant Thornton are offering, they'll do a further review, which will give us more substance as to how they've audited the numbers in the accounts and where they fit into Grenfell. It's not a, they're saying they can't, correct me if I'm wrong, they can't do a separate report for us on this report, because there would be conflicted.
Okay, I think a further review might be perfectly adequate.
Okay.
From Grant Thornton. I would say it has to be absolutely written in human language, so that anybody can pick it up and read it. It's really, it's not, we're all intelligent human beings. Not all of us spent our lives in banks or whatever. And it has to be, especially something like this, it's very sensitive, and we want anybody to be able to pick it up and have a pretty good idea of what it's saying. So if we ask specifically that it's written without too much technical language and laid out clearly, I think that'll be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Charles?
Yes, I mean, I think, although the speakers at the earlier meeting, outside speakers, sort of, one that I think referred to external audit, what is really, I think they are looking for is an internal audit piece of work done by somebody independent to the council, which obviously the obvious one here to do that is Mazars, who do internal audit work for us, but are independent. But I'm not clear whether the Grant Thornton work would actually really be that. So, I mean, that's my thinking at the moment. Well, yes, I mean, I think, yes, I mean, Councillor Dencode said, what's the difference? I mean, as I see it, and I think others have more expertise than me in this, external audit is really checking that the numbers are right, and whereas this is looking more at sort of the management process, and we have good examples of later in the agenda done by our very excellent internal audit people. But I mean, this is one, as I say, where I think there'd be greater competence if it was done by an external organisation. And as I say, I can't really get my mind around what exactly it is that Grant Thornton are offering us. But I think if we asked Mazars, or indeed one of the other independent firms, although the others seem to be conflicted, that it would be an internal audit type exercise.
Yeah. Just on that thought, just a quick question. Grant Thornton planning on charging us for this additional bit? Or is they going to see this as part of their 176 grand that they've got out of us this year? Yes or no?
So I haven't had that specific conversation, but we shouldn't rule out that there would be a fee of some kind involved. But yeah, we can have that.
But an immaterial fee in the grand scheme of things.
Just quickly to come back, I know you're kind of working around, but I think, so just to clarify, so for option 3, the further review by Grant Thornton, so what they would be able to provide is a note or some detail around the testing and the approach that they take as part of their annual external audit process. That's slightly different, I think, to option 2, where Councillor Williams was talk about either Mazars or Deloitte. So the ask of Mazars or Deloitte would be slightly different to what Grant Thornton would be able to provide. So just to be clear, that the Grant Thornton option is really just a note setting out the process that they go through as part of their external audit.
Yeah. Andrew?
I think actually, Liz, you pressed your button before me.
Oh, right. We're leading from the left, so it's not to be...
Yeah, so you go first.
Okay, thank you. No, it was just on Grant Thornton doing this. If they did it in relation to the work they'd done as part of the external audit, they would actually be using the same materiality that they'd used for the external audit, whereas the sort of materiality for Grenfell might be slightly different from that. And I would be concerned about that. So I think I do support what Councillor Williams said about having a sort of internal audit done by somebody who's independent and external.
Okay. Andrew, are you going to be brave enough to...
Well, yeah, I reinforce your word, it's tricky, because the objective is to get some reassurance about the table of numbers that we've got spent on Grenfell. I go back to my words that it was appropriate expenditure, it was efficient and effective. The difficulty seems to be to find somebody who will do that piece of work, because it does, I think, in the context of Grant Thornton, they start to refer to political decisions and by elected members, and they won't go there. So I think we need to find a way of getting some external assurance, but I think it goes beyond what perhaps we were thinking of a narrow, just external audit, checking back to books and records. Now, whether it's possible to do it, I don't know, and that possibly is something that we ought to test. Now, I don't know if Mike and Taryn have spoken to some of the firms to sort of understand what they would be willing to quote for or do, or whether it's your assessment of what you think they would do. But I think it seems to me that we've got to explore a bit further, because we're stuck with having to provide more assurance. But I don't quite know which way to go, other than I don't think we're going to get very far with a note from Grant Thornton explaining how their audit was structured and the testing that they did. So I ruled Grant Thornton out. I think we need another exercise. I think, for me personally, I would like to see somebody from outside come in and make those judgments about the way the money's been spent, the judgments that have been made. But we must sort of balance it all with how much effort, time do we spend looking backwards, and how much effort and time and money we spend looking forwards. So there's a balance to be struck in it, but I don't think I've probably got from this paper the answer.
Yep. Cosette, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I found this interesting reading because there's actually a fifth option, which is do nothing. And actually, when you look at all of these options, they all have different scopes.
Yep.
So we're not actually talking about apples and apples here when you consider it. I quite agree with what my committee colleagues have said, that the best course would be to do an internal audit style review, because I do not believe that, as has been cited in one of the options, for example, their scope will be to confirm that the figures included in the report align with the audited statement of accounts. That's not the assurance we need. We get that from our external auditor. And again, to the comments that have already been made, I don't think Grant Thornton's engagement on an extra capacity will yield what we want either. It feels to me that there is appetite from a reputation perspective to seek that additional assurance, but then the question is, what is the scope of that review? I don't think we know. So I do believe that we might be in a position to recommend option 2, particularly the Mazars point, to take a more internal audit style approach. But what we cannot do is state what the scope of that review is, because it hasn't been discussed. And that will be very fundamentally different than some kind of checking of alignment of figures in external accounts. So if this committee were to endorse the recommendation of option 2, and specifically to say that they want an internal audit style approach, how would we then determine what the scope would be, and when would we do the work? And finally, to the last point about forward versus backwards, I do think there needs to be assurance, but we also need to establish the rules of the road for the rest of the way. And they should say up front, what is the measure that they are going to come back and do assurance on at the end? Why not? If they're going to do an internal audit and give us assurance, then they should do it all for everything, all the way up to 2024. There should be a phase 2, and we should kind of know where we're supposed to be when we get to the end of that journey. Thank you, Chair.
So I'm just trying to get my head around that. Your last point, if you get in a Mazars and internal audit, it's obviously all about the scope, but then they should be contracted to do it all the way through.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. So next year they do another one, et cetera, et cetera.
It doesn't necessarily need to be on an annual basis, but there will need to be an assurance exercise at the end.
Continuous. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair, any comments?
Ian, my only comment would be, I think it's important that we do it sooner than later.
Yep.
And that therefore if Mike and Taryn can work up a scope for us that can be sent to the Audit Committee soon, I would be interested also in having an indicative fee structure from Mazars if we were to go down that line.
No. So I think we're talking about an internal audit style done by external people. Yeah, is that what we? Yeah, I think we're trying to
Yes.
express. So Deloitte's they're named here. They could be approached.
I mean, for the avoidance of doubt, what we're really asking them to do is essentially what we're saying Grant Thornton have already done, which...
Sorry, no, that's what we're saying. We're not asking them to do that. That is the point that we are making. We are
Right.
not asking them to do that. We're asking them to do something different. That's why the scope needs to be thought through and agreed.
Because obviously Taryn's produced and her team have produced a set of figures for what we've spent on Grenfell, and I think that would have to be the starting point for them to say whether those figures are correct. Obviously there'll be a problem if they're not. I don't think they will be, by the way. I think they will find that those figures are correct, as Grant Thornton has, but they can't. I don't think we want them to, unless you're saying you feel that they should start and reproduce a set of figures.
No,
they should.
No.
No, so they should start with the set of figures that we've produced.
Perhaps I'm being bold, but I believe what we're saying is that there's not a lot of extra value to be had of having yet another firm look at essentially what our external auditors have already done. What we are saying is, I believe, at least I am anyway, that from an assurance perspective, we're looking for something a little bit more. It's that end-to-end process that needs assurance. We don't need a double check on the figures that our external auditors have already validated, about which there have been no issues.
I think it's about effectiveness of internal controls. I mean, the sort of concerns that were raised by our public speakers earlier, and whether or not they have merit. And so that's why I said it's an internal audit type exercise done by external organisation. But as Colette says, I mean, it has to be specified, which we really haven't discussed. We can't tonight.
Yeah. So I think, if I can chuck my 10 cents in, I don't think Grant Thornton want to do it, and I don't think they're going to provide much for it. And I don't think it's going to satisfy us as a committee or members of the public who are interested in this. They're just going to provide a paper on how they audit, and that's not going to help anyone. Mazars already have a contract to support internal audit work here. So we've got a good relationship with them, and they've got a good relationship with, most importantly, our internal audit team, who I think as a committee we rate very highly. It's all about the scope.
Yep, I think just the other thing to say is they won't evaluate whether the spending was correct. You know, they won't look at whether we've spent the money on the right things. And I'm
Again,
sure
we haven't specified the scope.
Right, that's the core of it, really.
So what we're saying is we're changing the scope that you're proposing to something else. That's what we're saying.
Well, they will be able to assess whether we've spent the money on what we said we were going to spend the money on. They won't be able to assess whether we should have done something completely different, will they? Because our policy was to spend the money as we said we were going to spend it. So they can't, that's a policy decision, how we've spent the money. But we can work out some scope that...
Can they not look at whether or not we actually got value for money from that expenditure? That's really what we're asking for. What activity it was and what the impact of that was, and was it worth spending that money?
So can I turn this a bit on the head? We are extremely fortunate to have 3 wonderful co-opted members who've got a lot of experience putting these sort of things together. Rather than start with our finance team putting together a scope to go to us to turn around, could we do it the other way round and have our co-opted members put together what they think the scope should be?
We up for it? We'll give it a go.
Can I just chip in with something, Chair, briefly?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I didn't know where the voice was coming from. Right.
I should say my name as I when I call you. Yeah, there were. I'll just give an example, something that concerns me, and I don't know if this would be within the scope. But for example, when right at the beginning, soon after the fire, the council committed to spend a certain amount on buying new homes for people who are homeless from the fire, not only from the tower but nearby, and we all heard from local estate agents and all sorts that some of that went very badly. The estate agent said because the council was spending so much money at one time, it completely kind of shifted the market, sort of unintended consequence. And that some of the properties, when they'd bought them, they discovered subsequently that they weren't suitable for all kinds of reasons, and they had to sell them back and lost money in the process. So that was something which you may not have thought of, an unintended consequence, but I heard, and this is talking to estate agents who weren't very happy, that should happen. And that kind of thing was just a misunderstanding of how housing markets work or something, I don't know. So I don't know whether or not that would be included in the scope. And similarly, with some of the services bought in, that because there was so much pressure to bring people in, that maybe the wrong people, all of that stuff, and that is kind of where the markets have shifted and it costs more or less or whatever. I don't know if that would be included.
That's a great example, and I think that since we seem to have accepted the challenge to put a scope together, I think we need to be mindful of the internal audits that have already been done and are scheduled to be done, so we don't retread some of that ground.
I mean, referring to some of the discussions we had earlier, I mean, it's probably more helpful to look at some of the more recent expenditure, which is in fact what the criticisms were addressed to, rather than some of the things done very soon after the tragedy, where I think inevitably some decisions were made which could have been better, should we say.
We've also got to think about, are we just looking at the 50 million post-recovery expenditure? Or are we looking wider than that in terms of the, 425 million that has been spent? I don't know whether this has been done before, where we basically recruit our co-opted members to put this together, but I think it would be really optics on this one would look fantastic that our independent members put the scope together rather than officers. And secondly, I think we've got a very professional team of co-opted members to do that. So I think it would be, I think we should do this if we can. Yeah, I mean, anyone aware of what the procedures are on something like this?
Ian, can we not devise a resolution that you will propose, that I will second, asking the 3 co-opted members to prepare a draft,
Scope.
a draft scope, which the committee will then review as a whole, and then once the committee as a whole has agreed it, we will send through to the finance team. Can we do that?
Any comments from the finance team before we rush ahead?
No, I mean, that's fine. I think it's a good idea to write down what it is that you want to find out, in a sense. So that's how we're expressing it, what it is that you want to know. I think value for money has to be seen in the context of the decisions that the council made, though. You can only get, you can only get value. Did they achieve the results that they were supposed to? Was value for money achieved? But we did make the decisions we made. That is a kind of a given, isn't it? And I think that has to be a starting point, rather than should other decisions have been made. But I think that's fine. Yes, we can. The committee can, in effect, commission the work, and then we'll find a way to do that through the contracts that we've got.
And just to come in, I think it would be helpful when you've done the scope to have a look. So I think the very first report we took not only picked up on all the internal audit work, which I think you've picked up on already, but also the vast amount that was done by government as well over that period of time. So I think it might be helpful to have a look at the draft scope and just compare it, and particularly going back to the conversation that we had at the joint meeting, and in terms of impact, which Liz, you picked up earlier, there may be some questions that have been answered or you feel have. So it's probably coming back to that knitting together. So there's various things over the last 4 years that have taken place. So I think it's helpful for you to draft a scope, but it would also be helpful just to compare it then to what's already been done to see whether the scope needs to be adjusted accordingly.
Totally agree.
Yep. Thanks.
Great, so then I would like to propose a resolution that our 3 esteemed co-opted members, independent members, should draft the scope for the work.
Chairman, you're allowed to smile. That's a good suggestion. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I don't know what I was just, that's where I was going to prepare a scope for who, Mazars, Deloitte's, whatever. Does it really matter? Doesn't really matter. You're preparing the scope. Would anyone like to second my resolution? Councillor Lindsay? Everyone happy? Unanimous decision. Thank you very much. Co-opted members, careful what you wish for, you might just get it. Yes, Cosette.
I just wanted to say that at 9 p.m. I must go.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. So I think we've reached the end of that anyway. Yep. Thank you. So now we're moving on to A9, Internal Audit Progress Report. For information, Moira, take it as read. What would you like to highlight?
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to highlight a couple of things. We were asked to give some additional information, and it was referred to in the previous meeting, about the prepaid cards and the values that were put on their prepaid cards. That's been reported in here. And we've also identified the progress made with the implementation of recommendations in relation to the Grenfell-related audits. I also wanted just to draw your attention to the follow-up specifically the follow-up we've done on the housing repairs service for Grenfell, because there were lots of recommendations there, and you did ask whether James could be here today to perhaps answer any questions on any of those recommendations and whether there were any issues on that. So really I was just trying to focus on that so that you have the opportunity to ask James any questions that are relating to that.
Great, thank you. So, committee, any questions, probably starting with the implementation of recommendations?
On the... Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Yes,
thanks,
sorry,
Liz.
thank you. On the Grenfell housing repairs, I just wondered that the two that had not yet been actioned, where did they rank? Were they high, medium or low?
I believe one was medium, one was low. Yeah. And the medium one was to do with the process that's being developed.
Are we happy on the information on the prepaid cards, particularly as it came up in the earlier meeting?
For now.
For now. Okay.
Chair, can I just mention that all of the audits we do follow up on, and it is a bit of a, you can't always get all the answers at the same time, so where we don't get full responses on the follow-ups because it takes time, we will go back again. And some things change as well, so you have to look at how things change. And, you know, there's some of the recommendations that we've made that James, for example, might not be able to implement in the way we've written them. And that's where we have a dialogue with the service. We're there to try and achieve an objective or a control, and it may be a better way or a different way of doing it, so just to sort of flag that up. And somewhere like that particular audit, there were so many recommendations because it was quite new. And it's a process of moving it along over a period of time. We'll be coming back to do some follow-up in that area before the end of the financial year.
One of the members of the public's queries in our last meeting was talking about the payments to the prepaid cards. They quoted 100,000 a month. And then the payment stopped. I'm trying to sort of remember what was said. Can you give us an answer? I suspect you know where the question was going, Moira. Perhaps you could give us an answer on that.
I think I can, because Callum did also try to explain it. So what seemed to be going out of the bank, as it were, is a big lump sum of money for prepaid cards, but that is broken down by a number of different individual, almost like wallets. It's the way that the money gets put onto the card. So there'll be lots of individuals who will receive money, but it won't, you know, it's lots of individual amounts. But there'll only be one piece of money coming out of the bank from the council's point of view. Now, some people who have prepaid cards, they have budgets, as Callum explained, their personal budgets, effectively, but they can pool those budgets for a family.
Yeah.
So some people will get more than an individual, for example, because there could be a family, 2 parents, 3 kids, or whatever, and that would be significantly more than for an individual. So, but again, it all depends on what the circumstances are and what they're going to be using it for. It goes through quite a strict process, which I tried to sort of define in here as to how you can actually use that money, when you want to spend that money, what you want to use it on. It is reviewed quite strictly. It is meant to be to support you in your recovery from the tragedy, really. So
And is my understanding correct that further back in time, the payments were larger because they were all for all sorts of different things?
it was totally different.
Hence, you can't take 2,000 per annum per adult, 3,000 per child. That's per annum.
Yes.
So 100,000 a month seems like an enormous amount of money going off.
Yeah, that just isn't happening. What happened before was there was very little control over what that money was being, and the money that was being put on the cards was being spent on. There was also a different sort of need, because it was a more of a reaction need, desperate need. Whereas today it's trying to help them move forward. That was a responsive situation. And the cards were totally different. It was a totally different scenario, and what they were spending on was very different.
Okay.
And it wasn't scrutinised. That's the other difference.
Wasn't scrutinised at the time, or is still not scrutinised?
No, it is scrutinised now.
It is scrutinised now.
Absolutely, yeah.
But at the time, the larger amounts of money weren't scrutinised, but have we gone back in time and scrutinised those larger amounts of money?
Where we believe there's been something that's not appropriate, we have.
We're segueing into...
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect, thank you. Any further questions on this? Cosette?
I just have a general point. So one of the roles of our committee should be to monitor the completion of outstanding action items. And these are presented in the report, but they're presented in a piecemeal way. It would be really helpful if in the appendix next time and forevermore, if there was some kind of table at the end that summarized all past audits that have outstanding action items and were aged accordingly. Thank you.
Sorry, can I clarify? You would want a summary of
There
all
should be a
audits?
summary table that lists, in much the same way you've done it in the report, all audits that have outstanding action points, whether they're high, medium, or low.
So those where we haven't yet got the responses and the follow-ups. Follow-up recommendations, is that what you're...
No, it's tracking that the audit points that have been outstanding are getting closed within a reasonable period of time, and if they aren't, there's an explanation as to why, particularly the high ones, but all of them, actually.
Okay.
Audit actions should not linger unless there is a clear reason to do so, and if anything is aged for a long period of time, there should be a revisit to the point to see whether it's even still relevant. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I suggest you and Cosette email each other to ensure that you've got exactly what is requested there? Okay. So we're moving on to A10. Andrew, you're up.
That's me.
Or Maura. Oh, you
Unfortunately,
going
this
to
one,
let Andrew say anything tonight?
unfortunately, this one's me.
Okay.
I don't, hopefully you don't need to spend too much time on it. We have an audit charter, which is a requirement under the public sector internal audit standards. The charter needs to be reviewed regularly, and it should be approved on a periodic basis. We have reviewed it this year. We didn't do so last year because it wasn't really very timely to do it, but we've reviewed it this year. We've changed our approach to audit planning, which you may recall, which is reflected in the revised strategy, which is an appendix to the charter. So we tried to be a bit more agile with our audit planning. So we thought it was a good opportunity to update the charter and present it to you, and hopefully have your approval to it, so that we can show that we're compliant with the standard in having the charter. Thank you.
Everyone happy? Great, thank you. A11, now you're up, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take it as read, but I will highlight one area, which is really the table at 1.7. Normally, when we present the half-year report, we would compare it to the previous year, but given the fact that that was a pandemic year and there was lots of restrictions, I felt it more appropriate to try and show you the last 2 years, so that hopefully you'll be able to see that there are green shoots. We're getting back to fairly normal in terms of our output. The way we work is still slowly evolving. We're still very slow in terms of getting
confidence from members of the public in terms of our interviewing individuals, and also in terms of the courts themselves. They still have a little bit of a backlog, so we're playing catch up there. But that's the only points I was really trying to highlight, so happy to take any questions.
Can I start off and ask a question on that table on 1.7, in terms of the business grants and business interruption funds? Obviously, there was nothing in 2019, 2020, because we didn't have COVID. Then it was 4, and then it's gone up to, is that 19? Is that just because of the curve of, what is that curve doing? Is that curve continuing to go up, or?
I think what's happened here with the business grants is the few that we found in the year of the pandemic itself, they were referrals that individuals had identified to us, and they were fairly straightforward and easy to pick up. The ones that have taken slightly longer and have obviously gone into this financial year are probably because the investigations themselves needed to really go into the detail of, were these individuals eligible? Have they fallen through it? Is it a matter of they just weren't educated and didn't understand the criteria? Or have they actually committed a fraud? Have they provided false information? And obviously that takes a little bit longer in terms of checks. What I am sort of pleased to an extent to say is that our data has also been put in to a national fraud initiative, and we put the business grants in there as well. So there's a few of those that have come out, but in general, it's been very quiet on that respect. So we've got the assurance that we're not getting businesses who may be getting small business grants, but have 8 or 9 different businesses across the UK, or people who are multiple claiming fictitious businesses, full stop, but claiming in a number of boroughs. So, excuse me. So I think really it's just a case of, it's a graph that's going up. We may get more information come through, but at the moment in time, I think we've got fairly strong assurance of what we have paid out has been correct, because of the number, or the few numbers of frauds. I think across public sector as a whole, I think the business grants have been fairly well managed, because we've got useful intelligence. We're collecting money most of the time from these businesses, so we know who they are. I think the real risks in terms of business grants have been in the financial sector, where some of the bounce back or restart loans that have been given out by some of the financial institutions, because the money was government backed, their due diligence hasn't been as tight, and I don't think they've carried out as much due diligence as public sector do normally.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? No. Thank you, Andrew. Very good report.
Thank you. This next report is our annual review of the anti-fraud policies. There's only 2 policies from the 4 that have changed. There's a small change on the anti-bribery policy, where we've brought in a new declaration of interest for staff, and we've also done some comms to support that. So that's gone out across the council. And on the fraud response plan, there's a change there. There's a new paragraph, and that's just really highlighting the council's commitment to modern slavery and tackling modern slavery.
Any questions? All happy? Gazette.
No, sorry. Sure? Okay. I just wondered why modern slavery had been put in with fraud. It didn't seem to fit with me that, modern slavery and exploitation, or whether or not it would be better under whistleblowing. Where? What? Its own separate thing, okay. Yeah, so it didn't fit with fraud. And the only other thing is, I noticed that there's training for money laundering, but not for bribery, whistleblowing, or fraud.
Thank you. I think if I answer the first question, that was me taking guidance from our representative, who is a by-borough officer who deals with modern slavery, and her request was for acknowledgement in the fraud response plan. I take on board your point where it might go in whistleblowing, and I think it's probably something we need to add into whistleblowing as well. I'm happy to
my view would be I'm happy to sort of leave it in the fraud response plan so that officers are guided if they are looking for it. But I do agree it does need to be added to whistleblowing, and I will take that away. In terms of your second part of your question regarding the training, I have to be honest, the training's completed. I've just got to get it uploaded. It's an e-learning package that we need to upload onto our e-learning system, the learning platform of the council. So that will be added by, hopefully, over the next couple of months, and it will be there made available for all staff. I want it to also be part of the induction process. No, it will be once it's completed.
If I could just build on the modern slavery point, I appreciate that what I'm about to say may need to be checked for a local authority's specific setting, but there are requirements in terms of making statements about modern slavery and specifically having a separate representation about it available publicly on your website, usually at the bottom of the homepage. There needs to be right there with GDPR and other happy things. So my request would be, could you please just check what the requirements are about representations for modern slavery that need to be made by a local authority, if any, and should there be any that may give rise to having a modern slavery statement or policy that's independent. That's not to say that including reference to it in your fraud response plan shouldn't be there. That's fine, but there may be additional requirements that need to be considered. Thank you.
More than happy to take that away. I'll liaise with our modern slavery expert and get clarity for you. My understanding is there is a set page on the intranet where those details are, but again, I will double check. I've certainly put the link onto my fraud intranet page, but I'll double check in terms of what it's actually saying.
Great, thank you very much. A13, risk management update. Maura.
I'll try to keep it brief, Chair. You haven't seen the strategic register for...
Press something. I think I have. There's a button here which says do not press, and I think I've pressed it.
Thank you.
There,
I take the hint. Yeah, so this is the updated strategic risk register. It was reviewed by the Risk Control Board in October. There is still a little bit more work to be done on it because obviously risks change quite frequently, and there is the evolving risk from the disaggregation of the shared IT services. So we just wanted to make sure that you were aware that that is being reviewed and it's going to be reflected properly in the risk register. It just hasn't been fully written down as yet. A couple of other things just to mention is that you have asked about IT security, cybersecurity, a piece of work's going on at the moment with that, and you should get a report separately on that from David Hughes. And you did ask for some assessment of where we stood on our risk register compared with the wider national risks, and that a comparison of those has been done, and that's in the Appendix 2 of the report. So other than that, I was just going to say that, you know, as ever, if you get the opportunity, is there any specific risks that are shown or identified in here where you'd like a little bit more information or a deeper dive, take into account the fact that David will be coming back to you on IT security, then it would be great to hear from you on that.
Quick question on number 14. Surface water flooding. It just says in the middle of that of the RBK position, it says on July the 20th, 2007. Don't you mean July the 20th, 2021? Or was there a flood back then as well? There was a flood back then. But there was a pretty big flood in July this year.
Chairman, there were significant floods in 2007, possibly in 2009, certainly this year in my ward and around about, and I think going back into the latter years of the 1990 decade. I just think it would be appropriate to make sure that those dates are fully accurate, and the magnitude of the problem is not great for the council per se, but it is huge for residents.
I would, obviously I'll get that updated. I would suggest it could potentially be in a timing thing because some of these were updated probably prior to the summer flooding that we had this year.
Okay.
But yeah, I will get that updated.
And then one further point on hold on. Yeah, the last risk on the climate change 16. Where does the risk come into us as a council committing to net zero by 2034? And what I'm interested about is the cost of that. We've committed to something that maybe hasn't been fully costed. You hear numbers sort of banded around of 100 million, 200 million, I don't know. That's presumably a risk because it was a full council decision, so you've got to undo that, rather like national government's decision on it.
So, thanks. Just to come in on that. So there are some figures being mentioned. Obviously, the work that's going on at the moment, both within finance and also the service, is looking at what the action plan will look like to reach net carbon zero by 2030 for the council's portfolio, and then obviously 2014 for the borough as a whole. So there are some figures, but that work is being done at the moment to try and firm that up. There is a report that will come along to the Environment Select Committee, to their January meeting, just building on the report that I took earlier on in the year about what the options are. I mean, I think it's very much needs to be driven by the work that's taking place on the action plan and what that looks like and what the financial implications are, and then obviously looking at what the funding options are. What I just would add is, you know, it almost needs to be an integral part of our medium-term financial planning. So rather than an add-on that we think about, it's got to be fully integrated into those spending decisions that we make as part of the medium-term planning.
Okay, as long as it's on our radar. Thank you. Any further questions? Keep Cosette here for another 5 minutes. With another question?
Just one point further to the conversation we were having earlier. In the strategic risk register, in risk number 1, we might want to make reference to what happens beyond 2024.
Yes. Did you get that, Maura? Yeah. What happens after 2024? How are we going to fund it?
Failure appropriately and effectively to meet the housing, emotional, and psychological needs. Thank you.
Well remembered. And I think that's it. No other matters for consideration. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a long old session for most of us. Much appreciated. Have a good evening.
Thank you.